Hello again, everybody. This is a introduction to the module 50107051 Interprofessional Work on Developing Your Professional Identity. So this is a kind of indicative list of the kind of things that we will talk about in this module. But I suppose the emphasis here really is the fact that we work in organizations, we use evidence. How do we use that evidence when working with other professionals? What does it mean to work in a team? What do we think about leadership, and so on and so forth? And in particular, interprofessional practice and decision making and the impact that might have on people with lived experience. The multiple learning aims are about to develop further our kind of understanding of social work theory and evidence, how that kind of plays out, as it were, in interprofessional working and in decision making in particular, and to think about some of the factors that happen, for example, in group decision making, and some reflection and debate, discussion around those kind of issues. So the module learning outcomes, and as you know by now, learning outcomes really are what staff are marking against when you submit assignments. And the first thing is about organizational and systemic structures, so the big picture items that are impacting on our practice. Thinking again about evidence that we use to make decisions, funding, interventions, so on and so forth, but also starting to have some understanding of what kind of evidence do other professionals use and base their decision making on. Because in interprofessional practice, an understanding of other professionals' remits, ethos, and so on is really quite important. A central part of this process then is to consider what impact all of those factors in criteria 1 and 2 have on people with lived experience. And finally, what kind of dynamics, communication systems happen in group decision making and how they are informed by factors 1 and 2 and what impact those have on people with lived experience again. So just some basic kind of background stuff. The module designed to run alongside your contrasting learning experience, regardless of which route you are following. It's jointly taught with the BA and postgraduate DIP routes. So that probably gives us new opportunities for collaboration and learning. But it also means quite big classes. So perhaps we have to think about how we manage individual contributions. How do people get to talk in much bigger groups? And I am actually looking forward to learning from you about this, what might work better. There will be individual sessions, online group tutorials, assignment discussions, etc., etc. We'll set those dates up closer to the assignment time. But we very much, and I know from running this module previously, that bringing your examples into class allows us to have real life discussions. A core tenet, as it were, of adult education is that it should be based on real world examples and working out problems of things that are actually happening rather than just referring to theory. So this requires you to do your observation early on in the contrasting learning experience. And the second video in this particular little series will give you a lot more detail about what to do and what kind of things you should consider when you are doing them. So you can see it's two parts. The observation first. That basically means you go out and observe interagency practice. And there are many, many different things that people have looked at. It might be initial child protection conference. It might be a discharge team. It might be a MARAC. Whatever is going to be available to you, as it were, in your CLE. A lot of you will be seeing some of these processes for the first time, which is a pretty good thing for these observations, because it means you can bring a fresh pair of eyes, fresh perspective to those things. So that's formative. You're given a certain amount of words, to write that observation, bring them into class, and then we use that basically as a raw material to analyze in some depth and detail, aligning with the 4 criteria I mentioned earlier, what you have seen. And then we kind of try to make sense of it. But there'd be kind of rolling discussion about these things as we go. So I'm hoping that the module will have a kind of organic process where it develops over time. There are a lot of external speakers, so I try to bring in people from different disciplines, different areas of social work, and so on. This is a list of people who were here last year. The list changes generally year by year. I have some new people in mind for this year, and we'll be kind of emailing them and asking them about availability and so on. But if we're going to do interprofessional practice, we may as well have different professionals coming in talking about different things. So the assignment guidance, let's have a little look at it in some more detail. We actually have done this, at least with some groups in class. But one of the reasons we record these videos is as a kind of a reminder, and indeed we will come back to it again in the first term. So you are asked to complete an observation based on formal collaborative interagency on the job scenario and write an account of this of around 500 words. Okay, very straightforward. We're really looking for kind of a more descriptive account. So we're not asking you to analyze it at this stage. We're asking you to submit that at the same time, essentially, when the teaching for the module starts. So if you can, you might have a rough outline of your essay plan, and you might have some bullet points. But if you can only manage to have the observation and a description of that, that's absolutely fine. We'll give feedback for at least a month on those initial descriptions. And as I said, there will be individual tutorials and group tutorials, online sessions, and so on about this. As usual, you can find full details on Canvas, on the assignment tabs, in the usual way. So do spend a bit of time in reading those things, a repetition of some of the things that I've talked about here today. But nonetheless, repetition is good. It makes things stick in your head. For the final submission, say that advisedly, not for the actual observation, because I'm not really looking for you to put a lot of references and evidence in the descriptive element. But for the final submission, you will need to cite relevant research, you show how you apply theories and models, and critically, the extent to which the person with lived experience of social work is involved in decisions or outcomes, or is their voice heard or not, quite simply. As I say, we will discuss your plans in class, and you will get written feedback on your plan and the description by submitting to Canvas. So let's have a look at the assignment criteria, just kind of an initial go of what we're looking for and what might be involved. So the first one is evaluate how organizational and systemic structures influence social work practice, including leadership styles and partnership work. Okay, that's fairly straightforward, kinda. So when we're thinking about systems a lot of the time, this is a version of Bronfenbrenner's model, the ecological model. You'll likely be familiar with this at this stage in the course. This is one where a child is at the center of the whole thing. We know then they have an immediate family or household, and that the influences on that child spread wider until we get to the broader economic, policy, social, and wider environmental factors. Really, if we were doing this in a little bit more detail, we also have the chronosphere, which is a fancy way simply of saying that these things influence over time. They're not static influences. They change over time, and as the child grows and develops, different influences may come to the fore in more powerful and important ways. Now, the thing is, in social work practice, in this way, we're talking about the individuals. And while that's important, I think, in ecological terms, for this assignment, we also need to think about, well, do organizations have their own kind of ecosystem? And of course they do. And what are the kind of ecological, and I don't mean climate change, even though that is actually relevant to social work, right? But what are those environmental and broader contexts? Um, how are they influencing social work organizations and thereby our individual practice? And again, we'll talk more about that. Two, research and evidence informs day-to-day practice and interprofessional working. So, you're spending time in the university talking about theory and practice and models, and then you kind of go out into the world and you kind of think, is this actually what we're doing? Do you know what I mean? Are other things driving our practice? But nonetheless, I think it's very important to continue to stay engaged with theory because it actually teaches us how to do our jobs better, in my view. I suppose you could argue, well, he would say that. Well, then you tell me. Because if there are conflicts or contradictions between what is happening in the university and outside, it's worth having a reflection about why that might be the case. I think critically here, when you are advocating for people in interprofessional contexts, you quite often need to bring an evidence base into play. And you can say, well, that won't work because this is, or that will work because this isn't, or whatever. But you will also be working with other professionals who come from their own distinct evidence base, their ethos, their remit, their way of doing things, the culture of those organizations. And in order to work effectively with other people, we need to have some understanding of that. So this criteria actually gives us an opportunity to work on that a little bit. Then we think about how collaborative social work practice impacts those who are currently living with the experience of social work. So in some of your observations, for example, the person lived experience may be there. They may get to speak, they may not. A lot of different reasons why that might be the case. And in some of the decision-making forums that you might observe, there will be no PLE there. They will not be there. So our question might become, is there successful or robust advocacy on the part of that person? Has their voice been heard, even if it is in a second-hand way? In class, I played the wonderful Joshua Idahen. Your mum does the washing, which in fact is a critique of modern social work parlance. And sometimes we have all these theories and models and so on, but it comes down to the lived experience of people who is doing the washing, who ends up dragging that out of the washing machine and hanging it up several times a week. You should watch the video. It bears repeat watching, as does his other work. Assignment criteria 4. Okay, this is about understanding group and team communication systems, and sometimes people struggle with this a little bit, but teams are also groups, and groups function in particular ways. They do funny things like they can, for example, do group think, where an opinion becomes dominant within the group for various different reasons, and sometimes that's because of the power of certain individuals who promote that idea. But just because the group thinks a thing doesn't mean it's right. And if you were the person with a dissenting opinion within that group, that can be a very difficult place to be, particularly if you are right. Turns out, however, that groups actually make better decisions on average than individuals do. But you need to have certain criteria for that. I think an important part of this, and something I'm going to be emphasizing more this year than previous years, in actual fact is about our mode of working and the tools that we use for this. And online work seems to be increasingly something that students have been writing about in recent years for kind of obvious reasons. And we know the pros and cons of online working are very well rehearsed, are they not? It is saves time. And we don't have to travel to the meeting. Instead, we can do all our meetings at home, essentially. But of course, there are downsides. very distracting working at home. I think I'll just go and do the laundry now. But also it can be isolating, and there are things we might miss when working online that we would be more in a position to capture or understand or experience if we were face to face. Things like the more subtle ways of human communication, body language, and things of that nature. Or, as some people remarked to me during the pandemic when they were doing assessments, that if you were trying to assess a family or an older adult or whoever online, what you don't know is who is behind the door. That there may be a powerful influence in that assessment that you simply can't see online. So there's a lot of complexities involved in this, but I think you get the general idea, and generally we have a bit of fun with all of that. So looking forward, well, the next video in this series will be specifically about the observations. So let's kind of try to set out expectations of what that might be and do a little bit of planning even before you start the contrasting learning experience to see what kind of opportunities might be available for you to do that observation and get a start on this assignment. Questions, as I say, more on observations next time. And you may have many questions even at this stage, even though the module has not started. Now, I don't want to distract you too much from the activities that you have to do now, because as ever on the course, there's always a lot going on. But, you know, I am open to questions. But really, I hope that we get a quite active dialogue across the module when we actually start to deliver and perhaps start doing the observations in the second part of the academic year. So really, that's about it from me. I don't have anything else to add apart from please go and have a look at the next video. And having said all of that, it just remains for me to say, as ever, bye.